You will never guess how and when your wife will cheat on you. She can be super cool, love you, your kids, love your home, be happy, and then at one point, once and for all, she's already dating someone else. It's crazy, right? But that's exactly what happened to me. My name's Nick, and until recently, I thought I had a perfect marriage. My wife, Jessica, was everything I could have asked for. Funny, beautiful, supportive, and a fantastic mom to our 2 kids. We weren't rich, but we had enough. A nice house in the suburbs, good jobs, date nights when we could squeeze them in. Life was normal, stable. And then, one random Tuesday, it all shattered. Jessica took the subway to work that day. She usually drove, but the car was in the shop, so she decided to commute like the rest of New York. She kissed me goodbye, like always, said she'd be home by 6, and left with her laptop bag slung over her shoulder. No signs, no hints, just a normal day. But it wasn't. Somewhere between 14th Street and Grand Central it happened. A man, just some random guy in a leather jacket, slipped a note into her pocket as he got off the train, and then he winked at her. A wink. Jessica said she didn't even notice it until later when she was sitting at her desk at work. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out this small folded scrap of paper. At first she thought it was trash, but when she opened it, her heart raced. It said, "I'll be home in an hour. Join me if you dare. Apartment 3B, 117 Lexington Ave." And here's the part that kills me. She went. She didn't text me. She didn't call. She just left work early, took the train back downtown, and went straight to that address. And that's where the story gets messy. Jessica told me later that she didn't even know why she went. Curiosity, she said. It was like I wasn't in control of myself. She left her office, hopped back on the subway, and headed for Lexington Avenue. The address led her to an old brownstone building. It had that New York charm, worn brick, ivy crawling up the sides, and a rusted fire escape clinging to the facade like it was barely holding on. Her heart was pounding as she climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor. She kept telling herself to turn around, to go back to work, but something she couldn't explain, pushed her forward. Apartment 3B. She hesitated for a long moment, staring at the numbers on the door. Was this insane? Of course it was. She thought about me, the kids, everything we'd built together. But then she thought about how long it had been since she'd felt alive. Jessica knocked. The door opened almost immediately, like the man had been waiting for her. And there he was, the guy from the subway, tall, with dark hair that curled at the edges, and a smirk that looked like it was permanently etched on his face. "I didn't think you'd come," he said, leaning casually against the doorframe. "I shouldn't be here," Jessica replied, her voice shaky. She was gripping her purse so tightly her knuckles turned white. "But you are," he said, stepping aside to let her in. The apartment was small but stylish, with bookshelves lining one wall and a record player spinning some soft jazz in the corner. It smelled like coffee and cedarwood. Jessica hovered near the door, unsure of what to do with herself. "Relax," he said, pouring her a glass of wine without asking if she wanted one. "This isn't a hostage situation." She didn't drink it. She just held the glass, staring at the man in front of her, wondering how she'd ended up in this moment. Then he leaned in close. Too close. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice low and smooth. And Jessica, she told him. She told him her name. She didn't lie, didn't make up an excuse, didn't run. That's when he said, "You're different, Jessica, I can tell." Something about the way he said her name made her stomach flip, and for a split second, she thought about letting it happen, whatever it was. But then her phone buzzed. It was me. The text read, "Hey babe, just checking in. How's your day?" That was enough to snap her back to reality. She muttered some excuse about needing to leave and bolted for the door. The man didn't stop her. He just smirked and said, "See you around, Jessica," like he already knew she'd come back. But here's the kicker. She didn't tell me. She came home that night, kissed me like nothing had happened, and kept this secret locked away. For now. Jessica tried to put that day behind her, but it was like the memory had sunk its claws into her. She couldn't stop thinking about the man in 3B, his confidence, the way he said her name, the smirk that seemed to see right through her. Days turned into weeks, and Jessica went back to her routine. Work, home, family. She baked cookies with the kids, laughed at my terrible dad jokes, and played the role of the perfect wife. But inside, she was restless. Then one day it happened. She was on the subway again, and there he was, sitting across from her. He didn't say a word, just smiled and held up his phone. The screen showed one line of text: "You owe me a visit." Jessica's heart raced. She shook her head, trying to focus on the world outside the subway window. But when the train stopped at his station, he stood, gave her a knowing look, and walked off. She didn't follow. Not that day. But 2 days later, she was standing in front of his door again. Apartment 3B. She told herself she was going to confront him, to tell him to leave her alone. That's why she knocked this time. No hesitation, no lingering. Just knock and get it over with. He opened the door with the same smirk. "I knew you'd come back." "Look," she said, trying to sound firm. "Whatever this is, it has to stop. I can't do this." "Do what?" he asked innocently, leaning against the doorframe. This game you're playing," she said, gesturing between them. "Game?" He chuckled. "Jessica, you're the one who came back to me. Nobody forced you." She hated that he was right. She hated the way he made her feel. Vulnerable, seen, curious. But she stepped inside anyway, her resolve cracking. This time, the tension in the air was thicker. He didn't pour her wine or put on music. Instead, he sat on the couch and patted the spot next to him. "Tell me about your life," he said. Jessica froze. That wasn't what she expected. "Why?" she asked cautiously. "Because I want to know you," he said simply. "The real you. Not the one you show your husband or your boss or your kids. The one you keep buried." His words hit her like a freight train. She didn't know why, but she sat down and started talking. About work, the kids, me, her dreams, her regrets. Things she hadn't even admitted to herself. And he listened. He didn't interrupt or judge. He just nodded and let her spill her soul. By the time she left that night, nothing physical had happened between them. But emotionally, she'd crossed a line. And that's when everything started to unravel. Jessica thought she could keep it under control, this secret life she was building. But secrets have a way of growing, like weeds pushing through cracks in the pavement. And soon those cracks started to show. It began with small things. She started working late more often, or so she told me. She became glued to her phone, always hiding the screen when I walked by. And the intimacy between us? It vanished. At first, I chalked it up to stress, work, the kids, maybe even hormones. But my gut told me something was off. One night, I decided to test my instincts. She said she had a late meeting downtown, but something in her voice didn't sit right. So after putting the kids to bed, I grabbed my jacket and followed her. I parked a block away from her office and waited. But she never showed. Instead, I saw her walking quickly, almost nervously, toward Lexington Avenue. My stomach dropped. I followed her from a distance, weaving through crowds, my heart pounding so loud I could barely hear the city noise. She stopped at 117 Lexington, apartment 3B. I didn't know what to do. I felt frozen. Part of me wanted to storm in there, confront her, and end this nightmare. But another part of me was terrified. What if I was wrong? What if this was all some innocent misunderstanding? I waited. 20 minutes passed, then 30, an hour. When she finally came out, she looked different. Her hair was slightly disheveled, her lips flushed, her blouse wrinkled. She was glowing in a way I hadn't seen in years, and it made me sick to my stomach. I drove home in silence. When she walked through the door later, smiling like nothing had happened, I felt like a stranger was standing in my kitchen. And that's when the obsession started. The next few weeks were a blur. Jessica kept going back, and I kept following. But I never confronted her. I don't know why. I guess I wanted proof. Solid, undeniable proof. So one night I did something I'm not proud of. I waited until she was asleep, took her phone, and unlocked it with her fingerprint. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through her messages. There he was, Eli. Their messages weren't just flirty. They were raw, desperate, emotional. Eli, I can't stop thinking about last night. You're addicting. Jessica, I feel alive with you. I don't want to stop. Eli, then don't. And then I saw it. An address for a weekend trip. Not in the city, but a cabin upstate. They were planning to spend 2 days together, away from everything. That's when the rage hit me. It was like something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to sit back and let this happen. I called in sick the next day and took a drive upstate. I found the cabin, secluded, surrounded by trees, and perfect for an affair. But I wasn't going to let it be perfect. Not for them. I didn't tell Jessica I knew. Instead, I pretended everything was normal and even kissed her goodbye when she left for a work retreat. Then I followed. When I saw them arrive at the cabin, laughing and touching like a couple of teenagers, I felt the blood drain from my face. But I didn't burst in. Not yet. I waited until nightfall. When I finally knocked on the cabin door, Jessica answered. The look on her face, pure horror, told me everything I needed to know. "Nick," she whispered, stepping back. Eli appeared behind her, shirtless and smug. "Can I help you?" I didn't even look at him. My eyes were locked on Jessica. "We need to talk. Now." She hesitated, and that hesitation destroyed me. "I said now!" I shouted, and Eli flinched. Jessica grabbed her coat and stepped outside. I could tell she was trying to compose herself, but her hands were shaking. "Nick, I can explain." "Don't. Just don't." My voice cracked. "How long, Jessica? How long have you been doing this?" She looked down, and that was the answer. And then through my rage and heartbreak, I said something I didn't expect. "Get in the car." Because this wasn't over, not by a long shot. Jessica got in the car. She didn't say a word as I drove back toward the city, her fingers fidgeting nervously in her lap. I could feel the tension radiating off her, but I wasn't ready to let her speak. Not yet. My mind raced with questions. How did we get here? Who was she really? And why did she throw everything away for some guy in a subway? But no matter how hard I tried to make sense of it, nothing fit. Finally, after almost an hour of silence, I broke. "Why him?" I asked, my voice sharp and raw. Jessica turned to me, her eyes filled with tears. "I don't know." "That's not an answer," I snapped, slamming my hand on the steering wheel. "You don't just destroy a marriage because of I don't know." She flinched, but then something in her shifted. Her tears dried, and her voice steadied. "I felt invisible, Nick," she said, almost too calmly. "For years. I was just the wife, the mom, the one keeping it all together while you were always working, always distracted. And then he noticed me." I clenched my jaw, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. "So this is my fault now?" "No," she whispered. "It's mine. But he made me feel alive, like I mattered." Her words hit like a punch to the gut. I wanted to yell, to make her feel the pain she'd caused me. But what scared me most wasn't her confession. It was the way she said, "made me feel." Past tense. "What happened at the cabin?" I demanded. Jessica froze. Her breathing quickened, and I could see the panic rise in her eyes. I don't know," she stammered. "It got out of hand." "What got out of hand?" She hesitated before whispering, "Eli." Jessica's voice trembled as she told me the truth. It turned out Eli wasn't some random guy looking for a fling. He was something far worse, a manipulator who had been preying on Jessica's insecurities from the start. The note? The subway encounter? It wasn't fate. It was planned. Eli had been watching her for weeks, learning her schedule, figuring out the cracks in her life. He knew exactly how to make her feel wanted, how to say the things she'd been longing to hear. But once he had her, he didn't stop there. He pushed her boundaries, testing how far she'd go. And when she finally agreed to the cabin, he revealed his true colors. "He wasn't who I thought he was," Jessica said, her voice breaking. "He got possessive, controlling. He said he loved me, but it didn't feel like love. It felt dangerous." My stomach churned. "Dangerous how?" "He wouldn't let me leave," she admitted. "When I tried, he grabbed me. He said I belonged to him now." I slammed on the brakes, pulling the car onto the side of the road. "And you didn't call the police?" She shook her head. "I was scared." I didn't want anyone to know what I'd done. I stared at her, trying to make sense of everything. Part of me wanted to believe she was telling the truth, that she'd gotten in too deep and was trying to escape. But another part of me couldn't ignore the betrayal that led her there in the first place. And then my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "You took what's mine. You'll pay for this." My blood ran cold. "Is this him?" I asked, showing her the screen. Jessica's face went pale. "Yes." When we got home, I told Jessica to pack a bag for her and the kids. We weren't staying there, not with Eli lurking in the shadows. I didn't know what he was capable of, but I wasn't taking any chances. I spent the next few days looking over my shoulder, double-checking the locks and sleeping with a baseball bat next to the bed. But Eli didn't show up, not in person anyway. The texts kept coming, threats, accusations, promises that he'd take her back, and each one made me angrier. I wasn't going to let this guy win, so I set a trap. I messaged Eli back pretending to be Jessica. I told him she missed him, that she wanted to talk face to face. He took the bait and agreed to meet at a park in Brooklyn. When he showed up, I was waiting. I won't lie. Things got ugly. There were punches thrown, words screamed, and by the time the cops showed up, we were both bloody. Eli was arrested for harassment and assault, and Jessica filed for a restraining order. But the damage was already done. Jessica and I tried to fix things after that. Therapy, long talks, promises to rebuild. But some cracks can't be patched up. The truth is, I couldn't trust her anymore. Every time she left the house, I wondered if she'd slip back into old habits. And every time I looked at her, I saw her walking out of that cabin with his scent still on her skin. We separated 6 months later. The kids took it hard, but I made sure they knew it wasn't their fault. And as much as it hurt, I knew it was the right decision. Jessica tried to start over, but last I heard she was struggling. Eli left a mark on her that couldn't be erased, and the guilt of what she'd done ate at her. As for me, I focused on the kids and rebuilding my own life. And while the scars of betrayal never completely fade, I learned something important. Sometimes the people closest to you are the ones you should trust the least, and sometimes the biggest betrayals don't come with a bang. They come quietly, slipping into your life like a note in a pocket on a crowded subway.